Yeah, so I just want to make a video about, an issue that hasn't been talked about as much in the Iran war, which is just the staggering and wasteful depletion of munitions from the United States, and what that means for the future, and what that means for the role of the U.S. military and how it sees itself and its capabilities. It was widely reported that in the first 16 days of the conflict, the U.S. fired over 500 Tomahawk missiles. Um, those missiles are very expensive. They're very hard to create, partly because they're sourced from multiple parts. They're complex to make. And it's estimated that to replenish those 500 missiles would take 5 years. And that's just in the first 16 days of the conflict. And I think there is fairly reasonable and informed, hypotheses that the reason that Trump is pushing so hard to end the war in Iran, aside from gas prices and domestic pressure, is that the U.S. is running out of these expensive, defense and offensive systems. And of course, not only could that be embarrassing for them in this specific conflict, short and long term. So if their best systems become depleted or even unavailable, and then they have to rely on secondary systems, that could mean more planes shot down, more targets hit, and kind of a piercing of their sense of superiority or invulnerability. That's one. The bigger concern is any position of effective deterrence against Russia or China, especially. China's far away. Missiles are an important form of deterrence if China decides to invade Taiwan or, rattle sabers anywhere in the region. If the U.S. no longer has the missiles, and it certainly is depleted in terms of its ships, and a lot of the sort of displays of force that would be relevant in a conflict with China, then they're in very serious trouble. The problems with the U.S. military is a deep investment in these very expensive, very sophisticated systems. And to be in trouble after 2 weeks is a big problem against Iran, which is far from being a pure military. And you compare that with something like Ukraine, which has moved from essentially, in 2022, not considered one of the great militaries in the world, to now today being one of the most capable militaries in the world. And the kind of core of its strength, although it's not its only strength, is its drone production. Drones are cheap to produce, relatively speaking. You can produce them in larger amounts than a Tomahawk. Rather than learn from Ukraine's many successes, the U.S. unfortunately has locked itself into this highly expensive, highly inefficient procurement system where they just requested $1.5 trillion Pentagon budget, but that money won't solve the problem. You could spend $5 trillion on it, you won't solve the problem. Anyway, this is a very, very complex issue. One of the biggest bottlenecks is that some of the materials required for building these systems are actually produced by China, rare earths. And then a second problem is that a lot of these systems, to build them, obviously they're built by factories in the U.S., and the defense companies that would build them are waiting for orders and are very reluctant to build them because they've been burned before by overproduction and the kind of fiasco of American indecisiveness during the Russia-Ukraine conflict. So, it's a tough position. And, frankly, America's in trouble. And Russia and China know that. They've seen what happened. And among the many negative impacts of the Iran war is America's position as the kind of preeminent military has been weakened significantly by this war in many, many fronts. And, certainly if I were the American, military leaders, I don't count Pete Hegseth among those people, but real leaders, I'd be worried. And it's a big problem, and it's not one that has an easy solution.